A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version.
The Spy's Secret of Ablaykit. Channels like a belt connected his hometown, fresh sea air, and again he begins his work. The burgomaster had little time to write the book. Nicolas Witsen again reread his own diaries, looked through records of other people's memories, and turned to the secret documents. The end of the 17th century, Amsterdam. And why Amsterdam? Well, because the Amstel River was blocked by a dam. Amstel and dam. Dam. Well, here, and then the letter L disappeared somewhere and it turned into Amsterdam. The burgomaster did not tell anyone how he was able to get Bykov's article list from the Moscow embassy. The history of the Russian envoy's journey to China undoubtedly adorned Witsen's book. Interesting information could be used in his own manuscript. There, Prince Ablai built 2 stone buildings like fortresses between the stone mountains, for which he sent masters from Sina. There you can ride safely. From the Eastern and Northern Tartary by Nicolas Witsen. This is almost a literal quote from Bykov's secret manuscript, a very confusing story, the starting point of which became, oddly enough, the Jungar monastery in eastern Kazakhstan, Ablaykit. The temple was built over 3 years from 1654 and completed in 1657. Along with his embassy, Bykov drove and stopped at Ablai's, and he described here who built the monastery and the Chinese masters that were brought here. He really collected some very interesting material, and most of this was of such a topographic nature. Chapter 1. An oasis among the mountains. We are now at the South Gate. This was the gate for foot soldiers. Here only people could pass. Carts were not allowed to enter. The scorching sun disintegrating in the lens of the video camera, scattering bright spots, and somewhere in the distance, a well-coordinated team extracts from the centuries-old ground the particles of history. The total area of the fortress is more than 200 hectares. The perimeter of this fortress wall follows the crest, about 2,125 meters long. There are sketches of the 18th and 19th centuries, drawings on which one can judge that the height of the walls reached somewhere around 4 meters. Excavations happen either just once or for good. The desire to dig through to the historical truth quickly becomes a bad habit, archaeologists laugh. And then all the resources are good, both with shovels and from written sources. The latter help with the exact dating of the appearance of Ablaykit. The first mention comes just at the time of construction. The Russian embassy to China was going through here. By passing through these lands, I saw that this complex was being built at this time. He was generally the only person who recorded his impressions of the functioning monastery. Ablai Taisha creates a city. It is really unknown if in stone or in wood. A lot of wood was brought from the forest. The pine forest is thin like in Russia in cities near the vegetable gardens where the strongholds are put. And that city is created between the mountains of stone. From the list of Fyodor Bykov. The middle of the 17th century, the layered Kalbinsky mountains and walls almost indistinguishable in their background. Only the roof of the monastery overflows in the sun with a green-blue glaze. Neighboring buildings are under scaffolding. Felt yurts abound. And the monks in bright clothes sorted out the manuscripts, a fascinating picture after a many-week-long road. Ablai Taisha brought Baikov to his headquarters. The ruler himself came here. The ruler of these lands was Ablai, the ruler of the Hoshauts. I came with some periodicity, but apparently he had a winter headquarters here. He would come here for the winter. Distinguished guests were greeted by the Jungarian Prince Ablai at the Yamyevsky Lake. The latter described a diplomatic caravan of 40 camels and 50 horses. The messenger of the Russian Tsar, in turn, brought a salary. But to move further, into China, there simply was no sense. The weather had completely deteriorated, so they decided to stay. Ambassador Fyodor Baikov, he spent the winter there. A brief background. The Jungar tribes captured the territory of eastern Kazakhstan in the second half of the 17th century. The Jungarian state is a union of different tribes and based on the same Hoshauts, Turguts, Debets and others. Jungars on the new lands did their best to strengthen themselves. Buddhist temples were built. The word Kit is the name of a fortified monastery. In the territory of Kazakhstan, they know about a dozen. The same, for example, as the Semipalatinsk fortress, which was found with 7 chambers. It turns out to be an abandoned Buddhist complex called Dozhin Kit. The Russian state maintained relations with the Jungars. Moreover, they paid salaries to some taishas for the assistance of travelers, merchants and diplomats as they crossed the Jungar territories without problems. Chapter 2. Visiting the Taisha. From the beginning of the 17th century, expeditions for China were prepared several times, but the way to this country remained a mystery. It was Baikov who was to fill this gap. In the meantime, after a difficult journey, the diplomat was comfortably accommodated in one of the buildings of the temple complex. We identified several objects. These are the southern gate, the eastern gate, the temple itself with the platform, the monastery, and the economic infrastructure where there were furnaces. Was it a mini-city? Yes, in principle it could be. A picturesque and at the same time quite protected landscape. An ideal place for a fortress, said Fedor Baikov. A wall like the Chinese make, built by Chinese workers, rests on natural protection, the mountain. The place is convenient for many reasons. Here, long ago, one of the branches of the Silk Road passed through.
A very big wall. Its perimeter, it's more than 2 kilometers, and it goes behind us all the way here and up to the mountain. So my first impression was, whoa, this is huge.
If the student from Portugal got used to the first impression, the dimensions of the Ablaykit excavation, quickly she had to get used to the second impression, the pervasive wind. She's still adapting to that. But any expeditionary difficulties fade before the excitement of hunting for artifacts.
Every day we find many ceramics, mostly, a lot of iron nails. Iron nails are the nails that hold the wood together. And then more extraordinary finds. Sometimes we find a spear, a spearhead, or sometimes an arrowhead.
Today the guys found a statuette in the form of a bird. It is broken a little. There are many finds: figurines, coins, buttons, shards, remains of glazed bricks and birch bark scrolls. But the artifacts, which could be associated with the expedition of Fedor Baikov, have not yet been found. He was very well received. He describes both the wealth of this Ablai Taisha, well, in particular, this monastery, which surprised him with all its riches. The Russian envoy spent 5 weeks in the Jungar monastery, and then Ablai Taisha released Fyodor Baikov to the Chinese kingdom on the 29th day of June. What later Taisha himself wrote to the Tsar. An envoy, Fyodor Baikov, with servicemen arrived to the Chinese state. And in the Chinese state, the Chinese king Bogdan detained Fedor, and what the Chinese Tsar would do to Baikov. In China, commit him or kidnap him? Then he, Ablai, will immediately inform the Russian Tsar. From a letter of the Ablai Tasha to Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich. Bykov's diplomatic mission ended unsuccessfully. He refused to follow certain local traditions and was soon sent back from Beijing. On his way, the diplomat once again stopped at Ablaykit, but this time he did not record any information about it. Chapter 3: Hunting for the Manuscript. It's believed that Bykov was illiterate, and it was only thanks to the phenomenal memory that he was able to transmit to his clerks all the information he'd obtained. Surprisingly, the information obtained during 4 years of travel. I wonder how he did it without any notes. He did not necessarily have to be educated. Most likely, the expedition probably still had interpreters and even literate people who recorded important data. Because everything is fixed in detail, routes, prices for goods, names of settlements, rivers and lakes. In particular, Zaysan is mentioned. The lake is called in the Kalmyki language Kizilbash, and Kalmyks say that the lake is rich with fish, the water is fresh and green, and through that lake the Irtysh River passed, from the list of Fyodor Bykov. And here's another strange fact. The original Bykov's articles list has not been preserved, but there are 2 copies. They too are not completely preserved and differ significantly from each other. For example, in the version with an earlier date, 1657, it is written about Zaysan that it's necessary to travel for 4 days to see it. In another copy, there's no such information. Also, in the original entry, the town under construction is mentioned. In the following, only 2 buildings of burnt bricks. Archaeological research with records of the brick completely coincide, however. Are these fragments of walls? This is a decorated brick. Walls were made of bricks, the facade of the building. It was a facade brick with a pattern. You can say so.
Как облицовочный кирпич с узором, можно так сказать.
Most likely, corrections were made intentionally, perhaps with the purpose of confusing only interested parties, and there were a lot of them. The shortest land route from western Siberia to China explored by Bykov was long considered the only one. Representatives of many countries hunted for the article list, sometimes successfully. The ambassador of the Brandenburg court, Joachim Skultetus, was able to obtain valuable Russian papers and was soon able to read the list of Fyodor Bykov's report on his trip to China. The Russian manuscript was forwarded to London to the address of the publisher John Churchill. After the death of Skultetus, Bykov's legend was published in England from the Earth Circle by Sergei Markov. The intelligence worked well both in English and Swedish, although where is Siberia and where is Sweden, but they were interested nevertheless. That's how Ablaykit was one of the points on the map of the world interest. In his book, Northern and Eastern Tartary, the same mayor of Amsterdam, Nicolas Witsen, described it almost word for word as Bykov. 2 fortresses between the stone mountains that people from Sina built. And another information was repeated too. Western countries were very interested in the relations, especially in the field of trade that developed between China and Russia. In this case, Witsen himself was never actually in Jungaria. He hardly met Bykov, but he was in Moscow and was extremely interested in geography. Epilogue: An unapproachable mystery. Most likely, Ablaykit was planned as a small town, built to last, but alas, everything turned out differently. The temple complex named after the founder operated for only 18 years. This is all due to the military actions of Ablai Tasha. He did not share power with his brother, and so a quarrel took place between them that he had to flee the country. Something seems to have happened, something extraordinary, because it's hard to understand why he just left everything. I do not know what was going on there, but it turns out that Ablai Tasha was completely evicted. He left for the Volga region.
Что такое там могло произойти? Ну, сам, получается, Аблай отсюда был полностью выселен, он уходит туда дальше в Поволжье.
Ablaykit, the object of world fame, is the only one of all Kazakhstan structures that's recorded in written sources at the construction stage. It has repeatedly been investigated, and still, does not relinquish all of its secrets.